as Senator from Arizona, I obviously see firsthand the benefits of our relationship with Mexico. On the economic side alone, Arizona exported more than $8 billion worth of goods and services in 2016, $8 billion. Trade with Mexico supports tens of thousands of jobs in Arizona. Arizona obviously benefits when shoppers from Mexico come to Arizona as well. And NAFTA has enabled a number of U.S. industries to become more competitive on a global scale, with our supply chains being integrated with Mexico. Wall Street Journal article from a few weeks ago noted that nearly 60% of the 17.5 million light vehicles sold in the U.S. last year were assembled within the so-called auto alley that runs from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Obviously, the talk of renegotiating NAFTA, first it was talked about tearing it up, and then renegotiating. That obviously has an impact, just the talk of it, and I'm concerned about that. With regard to Mexico, I'd just like to ask the question, Mr. Noriega, do you believe that just has there been any impact with the rhetoric about renegotiating NAFTA in terms of decisions made by companies to locate or trade patterns? Is there a problem just by talking down our trade relationship?
Well, I certainly think there is a problem with that, and even the idea of being able to muscle certain companies into not relocating their plants. There are Mexican investors who invest in the United States as well. What if the Mexican government were to turn around and say you can't create jobs in Michigan, for example? A company named Rossini is a Mexican company that makes the brakes for the Tesla and has a new contract with Ford. Right. That's a Mexican company with Mexican engineers and Mexican technology. That's contributing in the long run to our economy. The big winner, if we were to quote tear off NAFTA, would be China right here in our backyard. Not only does NAFTA make us more competitive vis-a-vis China, but the Chinese are fully prepared to move into Mexico and to use Mexico as a platform, and all of its workers and the industrial base that our relationship helped create, to then export Chinese products to the United States or to the rest of the world and to our natural market in Latin America. There's literally a case in recent days of a Chinese investment to make automobiles in Mexico for export into Latin America. So that agreement, obviously, as you know, really better than almost anyone around because of your home state, is good for our interests. And the idea of sort of opening it up to renegotiation has had an impact in terms of the value of the Mexican peso. In the last 16 months, the Mexican peso, I think, has dropped 20% in value. That has a real impact on the lives of folks, and that's and it's really sort of a shame that we sow these kinds of doubts among our very best partners.
Well, thank you,
Senator. You made a very good point. Mexico has free trade agreements with 40 countries, 40 right now. They would all love to take advantage of the exports that might be lost if we abandon NAFTA. I think that's a very serious problem that we've got to address. In addition to that, China would be the main beneficiary. I didn't mention this in my comments, but what we also did, which I think was short-sighted, although I seem to be a minority in my own party and everywhere, is one of the first steps that was taken in the new administration was canceling the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's 11 countries. That involved Mexico, that involved Peru, that involved Canada. I think it was a terrible mistake. China's going to fill that vacuum. We don't want a NAFTA diminishing or a NAFTA derailment or a delay in NAFTA for other countries to move in. And, you know, I'm just going to give you one example. China, that doesn't have a trade agreement with Mexico, would step in. Days after the president talked about a Ford plant canceling the opening of a factory in Mexico, a company called JAC, a Chinese automobile manufacturer, announced that it would be opening its first plant in that country. You know, so there's movement that unless we move fast, we're going to hurt ourselves. And, you know, we're going to hurt Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado and Florida and New Hampshire. You know, 23 states. You mentioned your statistic with Mexico. 23 states out of our 50, the #1 export market is Mexico, almost half. Mm-hmm. So, you know, this is an economic security issue too.
Right. If you'll indulge for just a minute. Let me talk for a second about trade deficit. People, I think, get too hot and bothered about a trade deficit with Mexico. Our total trade deficit with Mexico is about $50 billion, mostly having to do with the energy sector, where we have a lot of trade deficits around the world. But people will point to that and say, you know, that's the reason we need to renegotiate or retool this relationship. When prior to NAFTA, 1993, I think total trade with Mexico was about $60 billion. Now it tops $500 billion. But we have a persistent trade deficit, largely because of energy, of only about $50 billion. Is there too much fixation on a trade deficit?
I think there is for two reasons. One is if you back the energy number out, Mexico actually is our largest trading partner, and the deficit is smaller as well. But the other thing is that because of these integrated supply chains that you know very, very well, really among the three countries, not just between Mexico and the United States, as it happens, 40% of Mexico's exports is actually U.S. content that's folded into the final product and then exported it out to the world, or frankly re-exported to the United States. So there is that exaggerates the story.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know, Senator, just another point. Brazil and Argentina have already approached Mexico on the corn crop if NAFTA or an import tax is initiated. So we would lose there. But on energy, I know this is a big issue for you. Mexico has energy reform, so it's permitting American investment for the first time. And I think that's good for both countries. There's a potential solar and wind opportunity for American companies in Baja California, right near you, for a new grid, a solar and wind grid that I think would happen. But the potential for cooperation on refineries, on interconnectivity with Mexico's grid is very important. Growing market for U.S. energy exports, Mexico is $20.2 billion in 2016. And the value of U.S. energy imports from Mexico to us is $8.7 billion. So we're doing pretty well there.
Thank you.
And